My name is Luna Warren. I'm 29 years old, and I just returned from my honeymoon to discover that my mother, Patricia, had sold my beloved grandmother's $2.3 million Victorian mansion that was legally mine through inheritance, using forged documents and claiming power of attorney she never possessed. Then had the audacity to tell me, "Your grandmother would want us all to be happy, not just you," while hosting lavish parties at the luxury properties she bought with my stolen legacy. What she didn't know was that my brilliant grandmother Eleanor had placed the Victorian house in an ironclad trust structure specifically designed to prevent this exact betrayal, and every dollar Patricia spent on her stolen dream life was about to be seized by federal marshals who would arrive at her housewarming party with handcuffs and asset forfeiture orders. I've spent the last 3 years caring for my grandmother Eleanor Warren during her battle with Alzheimer's disease, moving into her magnificent 1890s Victorian mansion in San Francisco's prestigious Pacific Heights neighborhood to provide around-the-clock care while she slowly lost her memories, but never lost her love for the granddaughter who refused to abandon her when she needed help the most. The house wasn't just a piece of real estate worth $2. $3 million. It was 4 generations of family history, containing my great-great-grandmother's original furniture, family portraits dating back to the 1800s, and countless memories of childhood visits where Grandma Eleanor taught me to bake cookies in her massive kitchen and told me stories about our ancestors who had built their fortune through hard work and integrity. The Victorian mansion at 1847 Broadway Street was an architectural masterpiece that had been featured in home design magazines and historical preservation publications, with its original hardwood floors, hand-carved staircases, stained glass windows, and meticulously maintained period details that made it one of the most coveted properties in a neighborhood where homes routinely sold for millions of dollars. But beyond its monetary value, the house represented everything I loved about my family's history and my grandmother's unwavering strength through decades of raising children, building a successful interior design business, and maintaining traditions that connected us to previous generations who had worked tirelessly to build something lasting and meaningful. Grandma Eleanor had been not just my grandmother, but my closest friend, mentor, and the person who understood my dreams and aspirations better than anyone else in our family. While my mother, Patricia, and my aunts Sandra and Rebecca had moved away and built their own lives with minimal contact, I had chosen to stay close to Eleanor, visiting regularly throughout my 20s, and eventually moving in completely when her Alzheimer's diagnosis made it clear that she needed constant care and companionship. "Luna, sweetheart," Eleanor had said during one of her lucid moments about 6 months before she passed away, "I want you to know that this house will be yours someday. You're the only one who truly loves it the way I do, and you're the only one who will preserve its history and character instead of just seeing it as money to be divided up. Your mother and aunts think I'm being unfair, but fairness isn't about equal division. It's about making sure precious things go to people who will treasure them." The conversation had taken place in the mansion's library, surrounded by first-edition books and family photographs that told the story of 4 generations of Warren women who had lived, loved, and built their dreams within those walls. Eleanor had been having more frequent memory lapses, but her determination to protect the house's future was crystal clear and legally documented through comprehensive estate planning that she had completed with San Francisco's most respected trust and estate attorney. The inheritance wasn't a surprise or a last-minute decision. It was the culmination of years of discussion between Eleanor and me about preserving family history and ensuring that the Victorian mansion would be maintained by someone who understood its significance beyond its market value. While Patricia, Sandra, and Rebecca had always viewed the house as a valuable asset that should eventually be sold and divided among Eleanor's children, I had consistently expressed my commitment to preserving it as our family's legacy home for future generations. I've worked with Harrison and Associates to create a trust structure that will protect this house from anyone who might try to sell it or divide it inappropriately, Eleanor had explained during another conversation with her estate attorney present. Luna will be the sole beneficiary, but the property will be held in trust with specific provisions that prevent it from being sold unless she personally makes that decision with proper legal procedures and documentation. The trust structure was sophisticated and deliberately complex, designed by attorney Margaret Harrison to prevent exactly the kind of family conflict and property theft that often occurred when valuable real estate passed between generations. Eleanor had learned from friends' experiences with contested inheritances and had spent considerable time and money ensuring that her wishes would be legally protected and impossible to circumvent through family pressure or fraudulent document manipulation. But while I understood that the house would eventually be mine, I never anticipated that Eleanor's death would trigger such immediate and devastating betrayal from my own mother, who had spent years expressing resentment about her mother's decision to leave the property to me, rather than dividing it equally among her 3 daughters. It's not fair that Luna gets everything just because she moved in and played nursemaid for a few years, Patricia had complained to my aunts during family gatherings, apparently unaware that I could hear her conversations in the next room. That house has been in our family for generations, and it should belong to all of Eleanor's children, not just the granddaughter who happened to be available for caregiving duties. The characterization of my 3 years of devoted care as playing nursemaid for a few years was both hurtful and revealing about how Patricia viewed my sacrifice and dedication to ensuring Eleanor's comfort and dignity during her final years. While I had put my own career and social life on hold to provide full-time care, Patricia had visited maybe once a month and had never offered to help with medical appointments, daily care needs, or the emotional support that Eleanor required as her condition progressed. Have you ever sacrificed years of your life caring for someone you love, only to have family members dismiss your dedication as opportunistic manipulation designed to secure inheritance benefits? That's exactly what I experienced as Patricia and my aunts suggested that my caregiving was motivated by greed rather than love, despite the obvious evidence that I could have been earning substantial income in my marketing career instead of providing unpaid elder care. The funeral arrangements and immediate aftermath of Eleanor's death were handled with apparent family unity, as Patricia, Sandra, Rebecca, and I worked together to plan a memorial service that honored our matriarch's life and contributions to our family and community. The Victorian mansion served as the gathering place for family members, close friends, and Eleanor's business associates who came to pay their respects and share memories of a woman who had touched many lives through her kindness, creativity, and unwavering commitment to family values. Eleanor would be so proud to see the family coming together during this difficult time, Patricia said during the reception following the funeral, her voice filled with apparent sincerity as she thanked me for hosting the gathering in the house that would soon be legally transferred to my ownership. This beautiful home is the perfect setting for celebrating her life and the legacy she built for all of us. The sentiment seemed genuine at the time, and I was grateful for what appeared to be family support during the grieving process and the complex legal procedures that would be required to transfer the property ownership according to Eleanor's trust arrangements. Attorney Margaret Harrison had explained that the transfer process would take several months to complete due to probate requirements and the sophisticated trust structure that Eleanor had established, but she assured me that the legal documentation was comprehensive and uncontestable. Luna, your grandmother was extremely thorough in her estate planning, Margaret had explained during our first meeting after the funeral. The trust structure she created is designed to prevent any challenges to your ownership, and the specific language she used makes it legally impossible for other family members to claim interests in the property or force a sale against your wishes. The legal protection was reassuring, especially given the resentment that Patricia and my aunts had expressed about Eleanor's decision to leave the house to me, rather than dividing it among her children. But I underestimated the lengths to which family members might go to circumvent legal protections when they felt entitled to assets they believed should be theirs. 2 months after Eleanor's funeral, I married my longtime boyfriend David Chen in a small ceremony held in the garden of the Victorian mansion, surrounded by the roses that Eleanor had planted and tended for decades. The wedding was intimate and meaningful, celebrating not just our commitment to each other, but also our shared appreciation for family history and our intention to preserve Eleanor's legacy by maintaining the house as our family home for future generations. I can't think of a more perfect place to start our marriage, David said during our wedding reception, gesturing toward the mansion that would soon officially become our home. Eleanor's spirit is everywhere in this house, and I know she would be thrilled to see it filled with love and new memories, while preserving all the history and traditions she worked so hard to maintain. The honeymoon that followed was a 2-week trip to Italy, where David and I explored the art and architecture that had inspired Eleanor's interior design career and influenced the aesthetic choices she had made throughout the Victorian mansion. We visited museums, toured historic homes, and collected ideas for small improvements and restorations that would honor the house's original character while making it fully functional for modern living. The Italian honeymoon represented not just a romantic getaway, but also a symbolic connection to Eleanor's passion for design and her commitment to preserving beautiful spaces for future generations. Every church, palace, and villa we visited reminded us of the treasures waiting for us back home in the Victorian mansion that would serve as the foundation for our own family's history and legacy. But while David and I were celebrating our marriage and planning our future in Eleanor's house, Patricia was executing a betrayal so devastating and illegal that it would ultimately destroy not just my inheritance, but also her own financial security and family relationships for years to come. The phone call that shattered my life came on the second to last day of our honeymoon, as David and I were preparing to return to San Francisco and begin our married life in the Victorian mansion that I had inherited from Eleanor. The caller was my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had lived next door to the mansion for over 30 years and had been close friends with my grandmother throughout their time as neighbors in Pacific Heights. "Luna, dear, I'm so sorry to call you during your honeymoon, but I didn't know who else to contact about what's happening to Eleanor's house," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice filled with confusion and distress about whatever situation had prompted her emergency call. "There are demolition crews here, and they're tearing down parts of the house. Your mother is here supervising the work, and she told me that the property has been sold to developers who are going to build condominiums." The information was so completely impossible that I initially assumed Mrs. Henderson was confused or mistaken about what she was witnessing. There was no way that Eleanor's house could be sold or demolished, given the trust structure that protected the property and the legal procedures that would be required to transfer ownership to me as the designated beneficiary. "Mrs. Henderson, that can't be right," I said, trying to remain calm while my mind raced through possible explanations for what she was describing. "The house can't be sold because it's held in trust, and I'm the only person authorized to make decisions about the property. Are you sure you're seeing demolition rather than renovation work?" "Luna, they're tearing down the kitchen and the back portion of the house," Mrs. Henderson replied, her voice becoming more urgent as she described destruction that clearly went far beyond any renovation project. "There are multiple trucks and crews, and your mother has paperwork that she's showing to the workers. She told me that Eleanor changed her mind before she died and decided to leave the property to all her children, rather than just to you." The claim that Eleanor had changed her will was impossible, given the sophisticated trust structure and the multiple conversations I had witnessed between Eleanor and her attorney about protecting the property from exactly this kind of family interference. But Mrs. Henderson's description of actual demolition work suggested that something serious was happening that required immediate investigation and potentially legal intervention. "I need you to take photos of everything you're seeing," I told Mrs. Henderson. "And please call the police if you witness any destruction of the house's historic features or structural elements. I'm going to contact Eleanor's attorney immediately and try to understand what's happening." The emergency call to attorney Margaret Harrison revealed information that confirmed my worst fears while providing hope that Patricia's apparent theft could be stopped and reversed through legal action. "Luna, I've been trying to reach you for 3 days," Margaret said as soon as she answered her phone, clearly relieved to finally make contact during what was obviously a crisis situation. "Your mother has been claiming that she has power of attorney and legal authority to sell the property, but her documentation is fraudulent. The trust structure your grandmother created makes it legally impossible for anyone other than you to authorize a sale or transfer of the property." The confirmation that Patricia was using fraudulent documents to steal the house was both devastating and encouraging. Devastating because it meant my own mother was committing serious federal crimes against me, but encouraging because it meant her actions were completely illegal and could be reversed through appropriate legal procedures. "How far has the sale progressed?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the extent of the damage and the timeline for stopping Patricia's theft before it became irreversible. "She's already signed purchase agreements with developers who specialize in historic property conversions," Margaret replied, "and they've paid a substantial deposit based on her fraudulent claim of authority to sell. The full transaction is scheduled to close tomorrow, which means we have less than 24 hours to obtain court orders, stopping the sale and exposing the document forgery." The timeline was incredibly tight, But Margaret assured me that the evidence of Patricia's fraud was so clear and comprehensive that emergency court intervention would be swift and definitive. The trust documents and Eleanor's estate planning were extensively documented, making it impossible for Patricia to legitimately claim any authority over the property. I'm filing emergency motions today for restraining orders, asset protection, and criminal referrals, Margaret explained. But you need to return to San Francisco immediately to sign documents and provide testimony about your mother's unauthorized actions. This is not just property theft. It's a complex federal crime involving forgery, fraud, and violation of trust laws. Have you ever discovered that a family member was committing serious crimes against you while you were celebrating one of the happiest moments of your life? That's exactly what I experienced as Patricia's betrayal transformed our romantic Italian honeymoon into an emergency legal crisis that required immediate action to prevent the complete destruction of Eleanor's legacy and my financial security. David and I caught the first available flight back to San Francisco, spending the entire journey trying to process the magnitude of Patricia's betrayal, while planning the legal and practical steps that would be necessary to stop her theft and protect what remained of Eleanor's property and legacy. The flight home was emotionally devastating as I realized that my own mother had chosen to destroy not just my inheritance, but also Eleanor's final wishes and the 4-generation family legacy that the Victorian mansion represented. Patricia had violated every trust, broken every family bond, and committed serious federal crimes, all for the sake of money that was never legally hers, and that she had no moral right to claim. But the flight was also filled with determined preparation for the legal battle that would expose Patricia's crimes and hopefully restore Eleanor's house to its rightful owner before the damage became irreversible and the family legacy was lost forever. The scene that greeted us when we arrived at 1847 Broadway Street was even worse than Mrs. Henderson had described during her emergency phone call. The beautiful Victorian mansion that had been Eleanor's pride and joy for over 40 years was being systematically demolished, with construction crews removing original architectural features, tearing down interior walls, and preparing the property for complete reconstruction as modern condominiums that would eliminate every trace of the historic character Eleanor had spent decades preserving. Patricia was indeed on site supervising the destruction, wearing a hard hat and carrying official-looking paperwork that she was using to direct the construction crews in their demolition of irreplaceable family history and architectural heritage. She appeared confident and comfortable in her role as the supposed property owner, apparently unaware that her fraudulent documentation was about to be exposed and that her theft was being documented by multiple witnesses and legal professionals. "Patricia, what the hell are you doing?" I confronted my mother directly, my voice filled with the rage and disbelief that had been building during the entire flight from Italy. "This house belongs to me through Eleanor's trust, and you have no legal authority to sell it or authorize any construction work." Her response revealed the full extent of her callous disregard for Eleanor's wishes, my inheritance rights, and the family legacy that was being destroyed by her greed and sense of entitlement. "Luna, your grandmother changed her mind before she died," Patricia said with apparent confidence, holding up documents that looked official but were clearly fraudulent based on Margaret Harrison's legal analysis. "She realized it wasn't fair to leave everything to you just because you moved in and took care of her for a few years. She wanted all her children to benefit from the family property, so she gave me power of attorney to handle the sale and make sure everyone gets their fair share." The lie was so elaborate and well-rehearsed that Patricia seemed to genuinely believe her own deception, despite the legal impossibility of what she was claiming and the obvious forgery involved in creating false power of attorney documents. "Patricia, Eleanor never changed her mind, and she never gave you power of attorney," I replied, pulling out my phone to document the destruction and Patricia's admission of responsibility for the fraudulent sale. "The trust structure she created specifically prevents anyone from selling this property without my personal authorization, and what you're doing is federal crime that will result in serious criminal charges." But Patricia was so committed to her theft and so convinced of her justification that she showed no concern about the legal consequences of her actions or the impossibility of her claims about Eleanor's supposed change of heart. Eleanor would want her family to be happy and prosperous, not just one granddaughter who happened to be available for nursing duties. Patricia continued, her voice becoming more defensive as she realized I wasn't going to accept her fraudulent explanations. This house is worth over $2 million, and that money should benefit all of Eleanor's children and grandchildren, not just you because you played favorite with an elderly woman who wasn't thinking clearly in her final years." The characterization of Eleanor's carefully planned estate arrangements as the confused decisions of someone who wasn't thinking clearly was both insulting to my grandmother's memory and legally irrelevant, given the extensive documentation of her mental competence and the sophisticated legal protections she had established specifically to prevent this kind of family theft. As Patricia and I argued in front of the construction crews who were systematically destroying Eleanor's legacy, Attorney Margaret Harrison arrived with court documents and law enforcement officers who would finally put an end to the illegal demolition and begin the process of exposing Patricia's crimes. "Ma'am, you need to stop all construction work immediately," Officer Rodriguez addressed Patricia after reviewing Margaret's emergency court orders. "These documents show that you do not have legal authority to authorize this demolition, and you are in violation of multiple court orders protecting this property from unauthorized alteration or sale." The arrival of law enforcement and legal documentation transformed Patricia's confident authority into panicked confusion as she realized that her fraudulent scheme was being exposed and that she was facing serious criminal charges for her theft and document forgery. "This is ridiculous," Patricia protested, waving her fake power of attorney documents as if they could override the legitimate legal protections that Eleanor had established. "I have full authority to sell this property, and these construction crews are working under valid contracts that I personally authorized." But Officer Rodriguez and Margaret Harrison were examining Patricia's documentation, with the expertise necessary to identify the obvious forgery and legal impossibilities that made her claims completely invalid. "Ma'am, these power of attorney documents appear to be falsified," Officer Rodriguez informed Patricia, after comparing her paperwork with the legitimate trust documents that Margaret had provided. "The signatures don't match, the dates are inconsistent with the decedent's timeline, and the legal language doesn't conform to California state requirements for valid power of attorney designation." The official identification of Patricia's document forgery marked the beginning of criminal proceedings that would expose not just property theft, but also multiple federal crimes that carried significant prison sentences and financial penalties. As construction crews were ordered to cease all demolition work and law enforcement officers began documenting the crime scene, I realized that Patricia's betrayal was even more extensive than I had initially understood, and that her theft of Eleanor's legacy was part of a larger pattern of fraud and deception that would require comprehensive legal action to fully address and resolve. The investigation into Patricia's fraudulent sale of Eleanor's house revealed a level of premeditation and criminal sophistication that was both shocking and legally devastating for her defense against the multiple federal charges she was now facing. The document forgery wasn't a simple mistake or misunderstanding. It was a carefully planned crime that involved creating false power of attorney papers, forging Eleanor's signature, and fabricating legal documentation designed to convince buyers and construction crews that Patricia had legitimate authority to sell property that was never legally hers. "Luna, your mother didn't just forge a single document," Margaret Harrison explained as we reviewed the evidence that would be presented to federal prosecutors. "She created an entire false paper trail, including fake medical assessments claiming your grandmother was mentally incompetent, fraudulent legal documents supposedly showing a last-minute will change, and forged financial records designed to support her claim of authority over the property." The sophistication of Patricia's fraud made it clear that this wasn't an impulsive decision driven by grief or family conflict, but a calculated crime that had been planned and executed over several months while I was focused on caring for Eleanor during her final illness and planning my wedding to David. But the most devastating discovery was that Patricia hadn't just stolen the house. She had already spent a substantial portion of the fraudulent sale proceeds on luxury purchases for herself, apparently confident that her theft would never be discovered or legally challenged. "Your mother used the initial payment from the property developers to purchase a luxury condominium in downtown San Francisco and a vacation home in Naples, Florida," Margaret continued, showing me financial records that documented Patricia's spending spree with my stolen inheritance. "She spent over $1.8 million in less than 2 weeks, apparently believing that the property sale was legitimate and that she was entitled to use the money for personal expenses. The revelation that Patricia had immediately converted my stolen inheritance into luxury real estate for herself was both infuriating and legally advantageous, since it provided clear evidence of her criminal intent and made asset recovery possible through federal seizure procedures. Meanwhile, the construction crews who had been demolishing Eleanor's house were documenting the extent of the damage that had been caused before the court orders stopped their work. The historic kitchen had been completely destroyed, including original cabinets and fixtures that were irreplaceable, and significant structural damage had been done to the foundation and exterior walls that would require extensive restoration work to repair. The damage to the historic features of this property is substantial, reported historic preservation specialist Dr. Amanda Foster, who had been brought in to assess the destruction and estimate restoration costs. The original Victorian kitchen was a perfect example of 1890s craftsmanship, and its destruction represents a significant loss to San Francisco's architectural heritage that will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to properly restore. The destruction of irreplaceable historic features added another dimension to Patricia's criminal liability, since the Victorian mansion was protected by city historic preservation ordinances that made unauthorized alterations a separate criminal offense beyond the property theft and document forgery charges. But the most emotionally devastating aspect of the investigation was discovering that Patricia had been planning and executing her theft while I was caring for Eleanor during her final months, using my absence and distraction to gather the personal information and legal documents she would need to forge her fraudulent power of attorney claims. Your mother had access to your grandmother's personal papers and legal documents while she was staying in the house during Eleanor's final illness, Margaret explained, and she apparently used that access to photocopy signatures, study the trust structure, and gather the information she would need to create convincing forgeries. The betrayal was so complete and calculating that I realized Patricia had been viewing Eleanor's death not as a family tragedy, but as a business opportunity that would allow her to steal millions of dollars worth of property through document fraud and legal manipulation. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was planning to rob you while you were focused on caring for a dying loved one? That's exactly what I experienced as the investigation revealed that Patricia had been preparing her theft while I was providing hospice care and emotional support to Eleanor during her final months of life. As federal prosecutors prepared their case against Patricia for property theft, document forgery, and fraud, I began working with restoration specialists and contractors to assess the damage to Eleanor's house and develop plans for repairing the destruction that had been caused by the illegal demolition work. The restoration would be expensive and time-consuming, but the house's historic significance and architectural integrity could be preserved and restored to honor Eleanor's memory and maintain the family legacy that Patricia had tried to destroy for personal financial gain. More importantly, the legal proceedings were revealing that Patricia's crimes extended far beyond simple property theft to include sophisticated financial fraud that would result in federal prison sentences and complete asset forfeiture of everything she had purchased with the stolen money. The criminal case against Patricia progressed rapidly once federal prosecutors reviewed the comprehensive evidence of document forgery, property theft, and fraud that had been compiled during the investigation. The sophistication of her crimes and the clear premeditation involved in planning and executing the theft made her case a priority for the U.S. Attorney's Office, which specialized in prosecuting complex financial crimes and saw Patricia's fraud as an example of the kind of family inheritance theft that was becoming increasingly common and required aggressive prosecution to deter. Ms. Warren's mother has committed multiple federal felonies including wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery of legal documents, and theft of property held in trust, explained Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Roberts during our meeting about the prosecution timeline. The evidence is so comprehensive and the crime so clear-cut that we expect to secure guilty verdicts on all charges, which could result in prison sentences of 15-20 years, plus complete restitution and asset forfeiture. The federal charges carried serious consequences that reflected the magnitude of Patricia's crimes and the sophisticated planning that had been required to execute such elaborate fraud. But more importantly for my immediate concerns, the criminal charges triggered automatic asset seizure procedures that would freeze Patricia's luxury purchases and eventually return the stolen money to me as the legitimate beneficiary of Eleanor's estate. All property purchased with proceeds from the fraudulent sale has been seized by federal marshals, Attorney Roberts continued, including the downtown condominium and the Florida vacation home that your mother bought with the stolen funds. These assets will be liquidated and the proceeds returned to you as restitution for the theft and fraud. The asset seizure was swift and comprehensive, with federal agents arriving at Patricia's new properties with court orders that immediately froze her access to the luxury lifestyle she had purchased with my stolen inheritance. The downtown condominium where she had been living was sealed and secured, while the Florida vacation home was placed under federal supervision pending liquidation proceedings. But the most satisfying aspect of the federal response was the timing of Patricia's arrest, which occurred during a housewarming party she was hosting at the downtown condominium to celebrate her apparent windfall and her successful theft of Eleanor's legacy. The housewarming party had been planned as a celebration of Patricia's good fortune, with invitations sent to extended family members, old friends, and neighbors who were invited to admire her beautiful new home and share in her apparent success. Patricia had been describing her acquisition of the luxury condominium as the result of Eleanor's final gift to the family, and her wise decision to sell the old Victorian house rather than letting it sit empty and deteriorate. Eleanor would be so happy to see her family enjoying the benefits of her legacy, Patricia had told guests during the early part of the party, apparently believing her own lies about Eleanor's supposed desire to have the family property sold and divided. She always wanted us to be comfortable and secure, and this beautiful home represents the fulfillment of her dreams for our family's future. The guests who attended Patricia's housewarming party included several family members who had supported her claims about Eleanor's supposed change of heart, and who had criticized me for being selfish and greedy in my desire to inherit the Victorian mansion according to Eleanor's actual wishes and legal documentation. Luna was always Eleanor's favorite, but blood is thicker than water, my Aunt Sandra had said during the party, apparently pleased that Patricia had found a way to circumvent Eleanor's estate planning and ensure that the family property benefited multiple relatives rather than just me. Patricia did the right thing by making sure Eleanor's wealth was shared appropriately among all her children. The family support for Patricia's theft was both painful and revealing about how relatives can rationalize criminal behavior when it benefits them financially or confirms their sense of entitlement to other people's assets and achievements. But as Patricia's guests enjoyed cocktails and admired the luxury condominium she had purchased with stolen money, federal agents were preparing to execute arrest warrants and asset seizure orders that would transform her celebration into the most humiliating moment of her life. The arrest occurred at exactly 8:30 p.m., during the peak of the housewarming party, when the maximum number of witnesses were present to observe Patricia's downfall and exposure as a criminal who had built her apparent success on theft and fraud. Patricia Warren, you are under arrest for federal charges including wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery, and theft of property held in trust, announced Special Agent Jennifer Martinez as federal marshals entered the condominium with arrest warrants and asset seizure orders. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court. The arrest was swift and professional, but the impact on Patricia and her party guests was devastating, as they realized that the beautiful condominium and the apparent wealth being celebrated were actually the proceeds of serious federal crimes that had been detected and prosecuted by law enforcement. This property has been purchased with stolen funds and is being seized as evidence in a federal criminal case, Agent Martinez announced to the shocked party guests. Everyone needs to leave the premises immediately while we execute search warrants and process evidence related to the fraud and theft charges. Have you ever watched someone who betrayed you face immediate and comprehensive consequences for their crimes while surrounded by people who had supported their theft and fraud? That's exactly what I experienced as Patricia was arrested in handcuffs at her own housewarming party while federal agents seized every asset she had purchased with my stolen inheritance. The guest reactions were immediate and dramatic, with family members and friends expressing shock and disbelief as they realized that Patricia's apparent success had been built on sophisticated criminal fraud rather than legitimate inheritance or business success. I can't believe Patricia would steal from her own daughter, one family friend said, as federal agents escorted party guests out of the seized condominium. She told us that Eleanor had changed her will and wanted the family property to be shared. We had no idea that she was lying about legal documents and committing federal crimes. The widespread shock and embarrassment among Patricia's supporters was gratifying, but also sad, as it revealed how family members and friends had been willing to believe comfortable lies, rather than investigating the truth about Eleanor's actual wishes and the legal protections she had established to prevent exactly this kind of theft. Meanwhile, the Florida vacation home that Patricia had purchased with additional stolen funds was simultaneously being seized by federal agents in Naples, ensuring that every asset acquired through her fraud would be recovered and returned to me as restitution for her crimes. The comprehensive nature of the federal response demonstrated that Patricia's sophisticated fraud had triggered equally sophisticated law enforcement procedures designed to recover stolen assets and ensure that criminals couldn't benefit from complex financial crimes involving forgery and property theft. As Patricia was processed into federal custody and her luxury lifestyle was stripped away by asset seizure orders, I felt a combination of justice and sadness that reflected the complex emotions of watching family relationships destroyed by greed and criminal behavior. The woman who had raised me and taught me about family loyalty had revealed herself to be someone willing to commit serious federal crimes against me for the sake of money she was never entitled to receive. The betrayal was complete and devastating, but it was also being met with appropriate legal consequences that would ensure she faced accountability for her actions. 6 months after Patricia's arrest at her fraudulent housewarming party, the legal resolution of her crimes had exceeded even my most optimistic expectations for justice and restitution. The federal prosecution had resulted in guilty pleas on all charges, with Patricia receiving a sentence of 12 years in federal prison plus complete financial restitution that included not only the stolen property value, but also punitive damages for the emotional distress and property damage caused by her sophisticated fraud. Your mother has been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, Assistant U.S. Attorney Roberts informed me during our final meeting about the criminal case. She's also been ordered to pay complete restitution of $2.8 million, which includes the original property value plus interest, punitive damages, restoration costs for the damaged historic features, and attorney fees for the complex litigation required to resolve her crimes. The prison sentence was appropriate for the magnitude of Patricia's crimes and the sophisticated planning that had been required to execute such elaborate fraud, while the financial restitution ensured that I would be compensated not only for the stolen inheritance, but also for the extensive legal costs and property damage that had resulted from her criminal actions. The seized assets from Patricia's luxury purchases had been liquidated and returned to me, providing immediate funds for the restoration work that would be necessary to repair the damage caused by the illegal demolition of Eleanor's Victorian mansion. The restoration project became both a practical necessity and an emotional healing process, as skilled craftspeople worked to rebuild the historic kitchen and repair the structural damage while preserving the architectural integrity that made the house a treasured example of San Francisco's Victorian heritage. The restoration work is going beautifully, reported master craftsman Robert Chen, who specialized in historic Victorian renovations and understood the importance of maintaining period authenticity while incorporating modern safety and efficiency features. We're using traditional materials and techniques to rebuild the kitchen exactly as it was originally designed, and we're repairing the foundation and structural damage in ways that will actually make the house stronger while preserving its historic character. The restoration project was expensive and time-consuming, but it was also deeply meaningful as a way of honoring Eleanor's memory and preserving the family legacy that Patricia had tried to destroy for personal financial gain. Every restored molding, every repaired window, and every recreated architectural detail represented not just property repair, but also the restoration of family history and traditions that had been threatened by greed and criminal behavior. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the legal resolution was the comprehensive nature of the consequences that Patricia faced for her betrayal and fraud. The federal conviction had destroyed her reputation, eliminated her financial resources, and ensured that she would spend over a decade in prison, while I rebuilt the life and legacy she had tried to steal. The contrast between Patricia's current situation and her brief period of stolen luxury was stark and instructive, demonstrating that authentic success and security cannot be built on foundations of theft and deception. While she had enjoyed a few weeks of fraudulent wealth, She was now facing years of imprisonment and financial ruin that would affect the rest of her life. Meanwhile, the Victorian mansion had been restored to its full glory and was serving as the family home that Eleanor had envisioned when she established the trust structure to protect it from exactly the kind of threat that Patricia had represented. David and I were living in the house with our new daughter Eleanor, named after her great-grandmother, and growing up surrounded by the same family traditions and architectural beauty that had shaped previous generations of Warren women. "This house feels alive with history and love," David often said, as we watched our daughter play in the same rooms where I had spent countless hours with Eleanor, learning about family traditions and developing the values that had motivated my commitment to preserving our legacy rather than converting it to cash. Eleanor would be so proud to see her great-granddaughter growing up here and carrying on the family traditions that she worked so hard to protect. The family relationships that had been damaged by Patricia's crimes were slowly healing, as relatives realized the truth about her fraud and began to understand that Eleanor's estate planning had been designed to preserve family legacy, rather than to unfairly exclude anyone from inheriting wealth. Several family members had apologized for supporting Patricia's theft, and had expressed genuine remorse for their failure to investigate the truth about Eleanor's actual wishes and legal arrangements. "Luna, I owe you a sincere apology for believing Patricia's lies about Eleanor changing her will," my Aunt Sandra said during a recent family gathering at the restored Victorian mansion. "I should have realized that Eleanor would never authorize the destruction of the house she loved so much, and I should have supported you instead of enabling Patricia's criminal behavior." The family reconciliation was meaningful, but also limited, as some relationships had been permanently damaged by the willingness of relatives to support theft and fraud when it benefited them financially, or confirmed their sense of entitlement to other people's assets. But the most important outcome of the entire ordeal was the preservation of Eleanor's legacy and the continuation of family traditions that would have been lost forever if Patricia's crimes had succeeded in destroying the Victorian mansion and converting 4 generations of family history into cash for personal spending. As I reflected on the year that had transformed me from an inheritance theft victim to the restored owner of Eleanor's beloved house, I realized that the most valuable lesson wasn't about legal protections or criminal consequences, but about the importance of honoring the wishes and values of people we love, even when those wishes create inconvenience or conflict with other family members' desires. Eleanor's trust structure had been designed not just to protect property, but to preserve values and traditions that she believed were more important than money or equal distribution among relatives. Her decision to leave the Victorian mansion to me wasn't favoritism. It was recognition that some family members are better suited to preserve legacy than others, and that protection of precious things sometimes requires difficult choices about inheritance and ownership. The house that Patricia had tried to steal and destroy was now serving its intended purpose as a family home, where traditions were preserved, values were taught, and future generations would learn about the importance of integrity, hard work, and commitment to something larger than immediate personal gratification. If you're reading this, and you're dealing with family members who feel entitled to inheritances or assets that weren't left to them, please know that you have legal rights and protections that can defend against even sophisticated theft and fraud. Estate planning documents and trust structures are designed specifically to prevent family conflicts and protect the wishes of people who have worked hard to build something meaningful for future generations. Trust and estate theft by family members is particularly devastating because it combines financial crime with personal betrayal. But it's also particularly prosecutable because family members often leave extensive evidence trails and have confidence in their ability to manipulate legal systems and family relationships. Setting boundaries with family members who commit crimes against you isn't cruel. It's necessary for protecting legacy and ensuring that the wishes of deceased loved ones are honored rather than being circumvented by relatives who feel entitled to assets they were never meant to receive. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone's memory is to ensure their final wishes are honored exactly as they intended, even when that requires legal action against family members who would prefer to rewrite history and redistribute assets according to their own sense of fairness and entitlement. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to defend an inheritance against family members who felt entitled to assets that weren't left to them? How did you handle situations where relatives tried to circumvent legal protections or estate planning documents? Your story might help someone else who's facing similar challenges and needs to understand that they have legal options for protecting inheritances and honoring the wishes of people they loved. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that your inherited responsibilities and assets are worth protecting through whatever legal means necessary, even when the threats come from within your own family. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.